Good afternoon, and welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Emily Depew, and I am a member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. The Student Advisory Board is a bipartisan group of members that can access many great opportunities through their involvement. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact us by emailing dolesab@ku.edu. After the presentation, we will have some time for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. Please stand if you are able and ask just one brief question. If you have difficulty hearing during the program, please alert one of our staff members or student volunteers who will assist you. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones and that there will be a book signing at the conclusion of this program. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Les Grau, who's the Research Director in the Foreign Military Studies Office in Fort Leavenworth. He is also a colleague of our guest today as they wrote a book together about the Afghan resistance and to the Soviet invasion. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be able to introduce Distinguished Professor of the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University, Ali Jalali. Ali Jalali has served as the Interior Minister of Afghanistan in 2003 to 2005. He was the Afghan ambassador to Germany in 2016-2018. I first met Ali back in 1989 when I was a active duty lieutenant colonel, Soviet Foreign Area officer at the Soviet Army Studies Office at Fort Leavenworth. And Ali was there with General Wardak, and we were involved in a project to translate from Dari and Russian lecture notes from the Voroshilov Academy of the General Staff. And it ended up being a 3-volume project. And at the end of this, we had everything we needed to know about how they fought on the operational level of war. And immediately, the Soviet Union collapsed. So it was not one of the better books. But Ali and I went on many adventures together. We became good friends. We went off to fight before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet hordes, and we always ended up as the Red Commanders, and we did quite well for them, I'm happy to say. And then we had Ali and Les's excellent adventure where we went over and we talked to Mujahideen about their experiences in the Soviet-Afghan War, and we produced The Other Side of the Mountain, which is one of the government printing office's bestsellers of all time, I'm happy to say. Ali has written another book, well, several others, but you'll have an opportunity at the end of this to purchase his Military History of Afghanistan from the Great Game to the Great War, Global War on Terror. When I first met Ali, he was already a colonel, a professor, a mujahideen, working for Voice of America, spoke fluent English, Pashto, Dari, Persian, and Tajik, had a professional knowledge of Turkish, French, Urdu, and Arabic. Oh my gosh, and now he's picked up a little German since. So without further ado, Ali, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Les, for this generous introduction. I hope that some of them was true. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you. I'm extremely pleased to have this be part of this distinguished gathering, and I specifically I'm grateful and thank the Dole Institution for giving me this opportunity to come and share with you some of my views, observations, and experience on a topic related to the Afghanistan and the long war there and prospects for peace. First of all, a disclaimer. My remarks reflects my own personal views, not necessarily those of the institution I work for, the National Defense University and NISA, or US government, or any government, or anybody else. So it is just my own personal remarks. 10 days ago, it was September 7, President Trump's cancellation of the talks with the Taliban brought Afghanistan once again into the international focus. A country that has been at war, conflict, and instability for the past 4 decades, in a country where the United States is entering next month the 19 years of involvement. It is definitely a long war, but not literally long war, which I will come back to talk about this. Citing the death of US soldiers and other Afghans in a suicide attack by the Taliban in Kabul actually was mentioned as the reason for President Trump to cancel the talks with the Taliban. Talks that actually created some optimism and hope that finally there will be some progress, some breakthrough in resolving this long conflict through peaceful negotiations. The nearly year-long U.S. talks with the representative of the Taliban, in fact, was something that it was closely observed by both people in Afghanistan and also in the United States and elsewhere. However, there was much criticism about it too. A war was fought actually, or is being fought, between the Taliban, supported by Pakistan because they have their bases in Pakistan, and the Afghan government, which actually is assisted and supported by the United States and other members of the international community. Given the complexity and the presence of several stakeholders in this war, resolving of this conflict is not easy, it's complicated, and probably will be a protracted process. Why only talks with the Taliban? While the war is between Afghan government forces and the Taliban, and also Pakistan is involved because Taliban bases in Pakistan. Unless the bases are closed, Taliban will be continued, supported by the infrastructure, which is despite the fact that Pakistan actually tried to facilitate the talks between Taliban and Afghanistan, and Pakistan, by some accounts, actually changes position and tries or made some efforts to help the peace process in Afghanistan, but said as long as the Taliban has their bases in Pakistan and they have their infrastructure in Pakistan, in support of Pakistan, they will have little incentive in order to end this war. On the other hand, as of 2011, when the United States and the international community started this issue that they want to leave Afghanistan, the Taliban also claimed that, okay, the time is on our side. When one side it gives you a timetable or a schedule that you are leaving, the other side probably will have this notion that probably they can wait them out. This has been going on for the past 10 years. Now, how the recent talks of U.S.-Taliban started. For years, Taliban were claiming that they will talk peace only when the foreign troops leave Afghanistan. So the talks between Taliban and the United States was not just for leaving to withdrawal of forces from Afghanistan, but it was used as a leverage to make Taliban to take action on other areas, which is direct talks with the Afghan government in order to bring peace to the country, and also to decide what kind of a future Afghanistan should have that peace will return to this country. And the other one was ceasefire, a comprehensive ceasefire. Now, during the past 1 year, that focus, the discussion was on two issues between the U.S. representative, Ambassador Khalilzad, the chief top negotiator, and representative of Taliban in Doha, in Qatar. The two issues that they were finally actually said that they have agreed upon in principle, one was a timetable of the U.S. forces, withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. In the other one, Taliban's pledge that they will sever ties with the terrorist groups and will not allow Afghanistan territory to be used against the United States and its allies. However, two other issues would follow these agreements. One is the direct talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban, and a comprehensive ceasefire. Usually in a peace process, as you know, 2-3 things are very important. That creates the context, a useful context for productive peace talks. One is ceasefire. If you have a ceasefire, then it helps the talks for peace, and also it creates some kind of an environment that people in the conflict area have contribute to the peaceful resolution of the fight. People mingle each other, they talk to each other, they understand each other much better. 1 year ago, there was 3-day ceasefire in Afghanistan during the Eid al-Fitr. In those 3 days, you saw very, very interesting scenes in Afghanistan. Taliban came from all over, inside the city, mingled with the people, with the government people, with the government soldiers, with police officers, going together, going to ice cream parlors. And that created a hope in the mind of people that, well, peace is possible. The two sides are fighting, are able to get along with each other. After 3 days, the hostilities resumed and conflict continued. A conflict that in this last month, August, was the heaviest. In last August, 2,300 Afghans died in 1 month in fighting between the Taliban and the Afghan security forces. And just today in Afghanistan, 2 suicide bombing attacks, one in Charikar, one in Kabul, killed about 50 people and wounded more than 50 people. So it is, why ceasefire? Taliban do not accept on ceasefire. Because this is the only leverage they have. Violence is their leverage. If they give up violence, they even cannot control their own people. And after the experience that they had last year, they never agreed on ceasefire. They make ceasefire, they postpone ceasefire to the end. Why the ceasefire usually should be the beginning, it is to the end. This is one of the problems in Afghanistan. Now, why the cancellation of talks with Taliban have been criticized by many people? Why was the reason of this cancellation? Of course, officially, it was the recent attack in Kabul was cited as the reason. However, there was a strong opposition inside the U.S. administration because they believe that this deal gives too much to the Taliban and does not help peace. What the Taliban will do? Taliban said, okay, we got the timetable, the U.S. forces are leaving, according to the timetable that was the draft which was announced, the U.S. pledged to leave 5,400 troops in 135 days. That is 4.5 months. And then the rest will leave probably on the basis of the condition on the ground, or 18 months or 17 months. For the Taliban, what the Taliban would do, they pledged that they will sever ties with the terrorist groups and will not allow Afghan territory to be used by terrorists against the United States. Where they are. They do not control all Afghanistan to do that. And they do not stop fighting. So they fight. So they're their way. And they can give the, okay, we will not allow anybody to use Afghanistan territory where they do not have control. So it is a one-sided kind of the concession to the Taliban. On the other hand, the war is not going to be settled only between the United States and the Taliban. It has to be other actors also to contribute to this. The Afghan government, which is an ally of the United States now, it is fighting hard against the Taliban and other terrorist groups. Since 2014, 45,000 security and military troops, military members of Afghanistan were killed in the fighting, while 72 members of the international community died in these 5 years. In fact, we're talking of the long war. Yes, it is a long war. It's a long war because if you see that about nearly 800,000 U.S. servicemen served in Afghanistan in that year, at least once. Many of, and we served more, 4 times, 5 times, 5 times served. And then 3,500 members of the international community that was helping Afghanistan died. And of this, over 2,300 U.S. citizens, U.S. servicemen. And at the same time, this war cost a lot, close to $1 trillion. Some of them probably will be, spent anyway on the troops, but some because of this war. As far as the Afghanistan reconstruction is concerned, it is also a lot of cost. It was less in the beginning, from 2001 to 2009, it was $89 billion. But later on, the cost of the sustaining of the Afghanistan, 350 members of police and army, as close to $4 billion a year. It's a costly war, fine. But this war has not been just one war. It was at least 4 kinds of wars that we can see. Each step, each war, each phase shaped the next phase. In that phase, that second phase shaped the third phase. The third phase shaped the fourth phase. So it is long war. For U.S., the long war actually has been long, but narrow in width, becoming narrow in width. For Afghans, it's a long war, but widening in width. And I will tell you why. The first phase, the reason the United States went to war was to punish those terrorist attackers who had innocent people in New York, attacked Pentagon, and in Pennsylvania wanted to, crush that. More than 3,000 innocent lives. Well, they used that the purpose of this war, which was supported by the Allies and also with the United Nations, it was to disrupt, destroy the Al-Qaeda network that was based in Afghanistan and was responsible for these attacks, and overthrow the host of this with the Taliban. Well, at the beginning, people thought this was going to be a long war, but it was a 2-month war. The war started, the military base, on 7th of October of 2001. Initially, well, airstrikes and about 1,000 special forces that were deployed in Afghanistan. And the rest was done by Afghans themselves. The Northern Allies were fighting the Taliban anyway, and also the Pashtuns who were also against the Taliban. On December 9, about 2 months later, the Taliban were removed from Kabul, from Kandahar, from all over Afghanistan. The Al-Qaeda the network was disrupted and the leadership was on the run. And it was on the December 5th in the Bonn conference they agreed on establishing an interim government in Afghanistan. Okay, by 2009, if you add some more days until December 18, when Osama bin Laden was trapped in the mountains east of Kabul in the Nangarhar province, so it was, and then he slipped away. So by December, by New Year, this war was over. The major fight after that was only one in the Shahikot, the Operation Anaconda, which was the last major battle of this war done by the United States. And Dr. Grau has published a book, a light book on the Operation Anaconda. I think it was published by Kansas University Press. Now, so what after that? This was one phase, a very successful phase. What happened after this? It was in 2002 that President Bush talked about reconstructing Afghanistan, reconstruction of Afghanistan a la Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan is a big name. Is Afghanistan is like a Europe to be built, but it was a poor country, the destroyed institutions, a poor country with no educations, no capacity. That's why Marshall Plan in Afghanistan was something that people thought, well, will it happen? Although in Marshall Plan, you see in Europe after the World War II, the cost of the Marshall Plan for the United States was $13 billion, that, which if you convert it to the dollar amount of today or a few years back, what $103 billion. While the U.S., only U.S., invested more than $130 billion in Afghanistan in the past 18 years. But see what happened. Europe was reconstructed, but Afghanistan is in shambles again. The situation is different in Europe. So after the withdrawal, the removal of Taliban, then the reconstruction phase came, which actually lasted 5 years. That was the program of the Bonn Agreement in 2000, which was agreed upon in December 5 of 2001. The idea was to build institutions of Afghanistan to stabilize it. But instead of investment of institutions, individuals and patronage networks who were marketed themselves as the best way to fight terrorism actually benefited from this training. So you had weak institutions and strong individuals, strong warlords. That was the problem that shaped the next phase. The next phase was the Taliban. The Taliban were removed from power, but not defeated. And that was a civil war in Afghanistan between Taliban and the Northern Alliance, the militias. So the intervention in Afghanistan was supported by one side, that was the Northern Alliance. In the other side was neither defeated nor reconciled. So they just crossed the border, established bases in Pakistan, and then in 2006 came back, which I call it the second war of Taliban. That was the difficult time, 2006. Institutions were weak, and the United States international community has to add troops after troops. The number of U.S. troops in 2003 was 12,000, and added 4,000 more. By 2005, the end of the Bonn process, it was only 20,000. But between 2006 and 2011, the peak of the U.S. forces was 100,000 by 2011 when they started withdrawing. Now, everybody knows that this war eventually has to be resolved peacefully. There's no military solution to this war. However, military solution, a peaceful solution, requires that the needed environment and context to do it. Afghanistan missed 2 opportunities or more in bringing peace in a more reasonable and desirable context. One was 2001, when Taliban were not excluded from the peace process in Bonn. The other one was in 2003, when I was in the government too, and they contacted the Afghan government. They wanted 2 things. One was the immunity from prosecution. The other one was to allow them to act as a political party, peaceful political activity. However, that was not a good time. That was when the war in Iraq just started. And many the assets were shifted from Afghanistan. On the other hand, nobody trusted Taliban at that time. They thought Taliban is a spent force. Why they should be, accommodated again? Both international community and also the Afghan. They thought this is one. That was the second. Now that context was easier. Today's context is very difficult. When the second war of Taliban actually became very violent, in 2014, the international community started to think about peaceful resolution of Afghanistan. That the first conference, London conference in 2010, decided that 2 things. One, to reduce the level of the threat through supporting Afghanistan reconciliation process, to bring peace to conciliation. Second, to build Afghanistan military and defense capacity so that they can conduct this war by themselves, and the international forces can withdraw from Afghanistan. That was 2010. It took 4 years, 2002 to 2014, that these 2 things would happen. On the one hand, the Afghan government forces were trained, and a 4th generation was from a level of 100,000, 120,000. The Afghan military forces, with security forces, both police and army, was increased to 352,000. And at the same time, the U.S. forces, international forces, withdraw from Afghanistan. By 2014, Afghanistan took over full responsibility for the war and for the food. And how many troops remain in Afghanistan? U.S. It was only 6,000 some hundred. And the Obama administration actually had a plan to reduce it to 5,500 next year and to 1,000 finally. Well, that 6,000, that 5,500 remain next year. But because of this deterioration of situation of counterterrorism, Daesh emergence, then these troops were increased somehow. And the purpose was to train, advise, and assist Afghan security forces. No combat operations. Only one part of the forces had to fight terrorism, which was actually had cells in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. So after 2014, this war was long, but narrowed in width. But for Afghans, the other way, it was a long war, widening the width of it. By now, it's a wide depth and long war. Finally, the solution should come through peaceful negotiation. But in order to have that negotiation, the environment, the context should be created for that. There are 4 elements for a peace. And then probably the 5th one I will come to. First, the Taliban itself. What is their incentive to agree peace? They have a very good position because the only thing they do is to destruction. Their leverage is violence. They do not deliver services to people. They actually do not control any major cities. They control only rural areas and some areas in the district centers. They claim that 50% or close to 50% of the territory is controlled or influenced by them. Well, it is all rural areas that they can control. But control means that you deliver services, that there's a movement of people, you collect taxes. That is not happening. It's only occupation. So they do not have much to offer. Second, they have their bases still in Pakistan, families in Pakistan, infrastructure in Pakistan. There are certain circles in Pakistan, they help them. And as long as Pakistan has this dispute with India, they have this tendency to have an ally in Taliban in Afghanistan. If the war ends, if the international forces withdraw completely, they want to have an ally there. And Taliban also was using other actors in the region to use their relationship with the United States to get some legitimacy through them. That's Iran, that's Russia. In the last 2 years, they have been going to Iran, going to do Russia. Even on the 7th of this month, September, when President Trump canceled the talks with Taliban, since then, they have sent their delegation to Tehran, to Iran, spoke with the Iranian government, sent their delegation to Russia, and they are now sending a delegation to China. They get their legitimacy from outside. While inside Afghanistan, they never had acceptability more than 10% or 11%. On the other hand, the Afghan government has their own problems. They have the legitimacy, elected government, supported, recognized by the international community, and have strategic partnership agreement with the United States, with the NATO and other countries. But they are divided. Politics is divided, and the conflict with the Taliban with terrorism. There are about 20 groups of terrorism active in Afghanistan. They are not Afghans. They are coming from other parts in order to train, in order to polish their credential for their own areas, countries. They are involved in fight, and there's drug production and trafficking. There's poverty, and there's corruption. All these things make them weak in order to get together and fight the Taliban in a way. But on the other hand, they have the legitimacy. So these are two sides. Then, as I said, the regional support for the Taliban, that's another dimension. Then U.S., the United States. I think this war should be ended for the United States. It's a long war for the United States. Even if one soldier is killed in that one, it is a waste. Why? But those who are talking about withdrawal, are they talking on the basis of security necessities or domestic political necessities? If you talk about just domestic politics, then yes, withdraw the troops from Afghanistan. It will help some politician in the next elections because it's appealing to people. On the other hand, there are other in the civil society, in Congress, and politicians, that they say, yes, we have to withdraw, but we should not create a situation that it will deteriorate the stability in that country, create a civil war, and finally, we or somebody has to go back in order. Of course, there are some questions that, can we fix Afghanistan? Afghanistan is a country of so many tribes and people. That country is not a kind of tribal society. In like any country, there has different ethnic groups. In these ethnic groups straddle the borders of Afghanistan with other neighbors. Tajik with Tajikistan, Uzbek with Uzbekistan, Turkmen with Turkmenistan, Persian speaking with Iran, Pashtuns with Pakistan. But this country was made not by geography, it was by history. And their will to live together, that will to be a nation, as their will to persist together. During the war, some people, Tajik went to Tajikistan, Uzbek to Uzbekistan, Persian speaking to Iran, Pashtuns to Pakistan. They were very mistreated there. They came back more Afghans than in the past. And as a people, the border of Afghanistan was agreed upon by two major empires, British Empire of India and Russian Empire in 19th century. However, this small country, then they made it a buffer to block the clashes between two big empires. That small country played that role. But in the 20th century, this small country had to fight both successfully. At the beginning of 20th century, the British Empire, they removed the restriction on its foreign policy, and toward the end of 20th century, the Soviet Union with the success of the Russian Empire. But you do not see that country, there's any call of secession or disintegration of that. In fact, even during the Civil War, no factions, no militias were trying to secede, but all was fighting for Kabul. And therefore, the notion that Afghanistan did not, the history of Afghanistan does not start from 1978. Before that, Afghanistan was a peaceful and poor, but peaceful and stable country. It was the intervention of the people. Once I was talking to an old man in Ghazni. I said, why you complain? You have to take care of yourself. Don't expect the international to come in and do everything for you. I said, I don't want that. I said, why are you complaining? He said, what I want from the world, from the international community, is not this. What I want is something that they cannot give it to me. And I insisted, what is that? He said, well, can they undo what they did to us? He said, we were a small country, peaceful, poor, but happy. Once the Soviet Union infiltrated our country, radicalized people to the left, and then the Soviet Union came to impose their ideology on us. And we fought this. We lost many things. And the other superpower came in order to fight Soviet Union as part of this Cold War. They brought all these jihadists and fundamentalists, extremists to fight the Soviet Union, because they thought the communists can be fought only by the people who will be inspired by the same kind of fervor, ideological fervor. And then they left us. The Soviet Union left, the US left, and we were with these extremist jihadis came from all over the world. Someone else was not Afghan, he was an Arab. All these other people was Arab. Then Chechens were come from Chechnya. Uzbekistan Islamic movement came from Uzbekistan. The East Turkestan Islamic movement came from China. And they actually destroyed us now. And we are fighting them. Fighting Taliban, fighting Daesh, fighting them. That's why I'm saying that. They cannot give us what we want to undo what was done to us. But in any case, peace should, the war should finally resolve through peaceful settlement. But in peaceful settlement, the mechanism should be used that really will provide three things. It should be, the parties should be legitimate, that they can deliver. Second, it should be inclusive. Third, sustainable. Legitimacy, those who can deliver should be contacted, should be included. In inclusiveness means that. Legitimacy and inclusiveness. In inclusiveness, it should be Afghan government, it should be the Taliban, should be the US, should be Pakistan, should also be the regional actors, including China, Iran, Russia. They should all be included. Then it should be sustainable. The decision that you make should do not sow the seeds of another conflict. In that case, I think the steps that take should be ceasefire, all should be. Second, ceasefire, talks between the fighting groups, Afghan government and Taliban, to find a common ground in the future of this country. The third, in that kind, in order to support this, Pakistan should close the bases of Taliban in its territory, stop assisting the Taliban. That's their lifeline. In the United States, should withdraw their forces from Afghanistan and all this. However, this withdrawal should be like this. It would be backloaded, and the withdrawal schedule should be benchmarked on the progress in other areas of Afghan Taliban talks, Taliban's closure of their places. Then the peace can come to Afghanistan eventually. And otherwise, Afghanistan is not only going to be a kind of a flashpoint in the region, will affect the stability in the whole region, including stability of the neighboring countries, including Pakistan and others. To conclude, nearly a century ago, a renowned poet, philosopher of subcontinent, Iqbal Lahori, hailed Afghanistan for its historical drive and vitality. He called it the heart of Asia and said the continent will suffer when the heart is in trouble. Of course, Asia is different today, but still the trouble caused by instability in Afghanistan is being felt far beyond the Afghan borders. Peace and stability in the region, for many reasons, hinges on restoration of peace and normalcy in Afghanistan, including the end of long war for the United States. I thank you very much for your attention. Now open for questions if you have questions. Or maybe I confused you even more. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Would the solution involve some kind of partition of Afghanistan? Taliban takes this part, the Afghan government takes this part, and then maybe the two could kind of work it out?
Well, I heard these kind of suggestions, but Afghanistan is an atomized society. How do you compartmentalize it? I'm a Pashtun from the south. My mother late mother was Tajik from the north. We have in our family Uzbeks, Tajik, Uzbeks, Hazaras. And that's not only unique to me, it's to everybody else. On the other hand, Neither the Taliban want to divide the country, nor the Afghan government, nor any Afghan will do that. And therefore, it is Afghanistan is built by history. It is history and geography make this country a very unique country. It is atomized. You cannot compartmentalize it on the basis of ethnicity or religion, because it's inbuilt. And it needs the wisdom and statecraft and to reconcile the forces of tradition with the exigencies of building a modern state. Sir. Yes, sir.
I have a question, sir. Do you think that, in my opinion, maybe the recent negotiation ended up like what Soviet negotiation happened in 1989, when the Soviets just pull out, and then the communist government collapsed, and then none of those promises met by either side. So, do you think that maybe that would be something like this can happen? That Taliban take over and then finally said, have a nice day, forget about the rest of the communication.
Yes, sir, that's a danger that many people in Afghanistan actually are afraid of. You know, in the Geneva, the Soviet Union had to leave Afghanistan. And this actually came because of not only what they were losing in Afghanistan, but the situation inside the Soviet Union too. And for the U.S., it was a major feat to finally see the U.S., the Soviet Union, is leaving an area that they occupied. The rest was not resolved. The Geneva Agreement was between Afghanistan and Pakistan. What they did, okay, if you read that Geneva Agreement, not interference with each other's affairs, and then on the protocol was the return of refugees. These are things that it was not actually the main elements of the war. Pakistan was supporting Mujahideen, and Mujahideen was coming and fighting the Soviet Union. And on the other hand, the Secretary Shultz, Zain Noorani from Pakistan, and the Shortnaze from, they were there to guarantee this. Then, and the protocol said the Soviet Union will withdraw their forces from Afghanistan. Nothing more. What happens with Afghanistan? Unless they had it was that, okay, then the Pakistan will stop the infiltration of Mujahideen, close their borders, and Afghanistan government will show certain things, and bring a kind of a joint government. That was not discussed at all. And when the president of Pakistan at that time was asked that, okay, here it says that the Pakistan should not support the infiltration in Afghanistan. Then he said, well, we never, said that we are doing this, so we will continue this. And for the Soviet Union actually was from inside that, in 2000, I think it was 1993, in a conference in Monterey, California. There was an international conference called Afghan Alternatives. What's going to happen to Afghanistan? Peaceful solution, what other things? Like same thing we do. Majority of speakers from all around the world was thinking that the Soviet Union is not going to leave Afghanistan until turn it into another satellite country like Mongolia or others. So this is the time for him to bleed the Soviet Union. And for that, you have to bring the same kind of ideologically inspired fighters to do that. I was the only person, or maybe one of the few people, that I said the Soviet Union is going to leave Afghanistan. We have to think about what is going to happen after they leave. And I had two arguments for this. I said, first argument, people of Afghanistan who are fighting the Soviet Union, they don't care whether they are winning or losing this war. They think this is the right thing to do, as they did for the British in the 19th century. And the British were wise enough that you cannot win this kind of war. They think this is the right thing to do. Either I get killed or I kill the other side. So how long the Soviet Union can afford this kind of war? One day, they will realize it's not worth it. Second, that year, 2003, maybe Professor Jack will remember, that Agarkov, the chief of the General Staff of the Soviet Union, wrote that treatise of his, always ready to defend the motherland. There he said that now the correlation of forces changing, it is more quantitative correlation, not qualitative, not quantitative. That West is ahead of us in advanced technology and high technology. If the Soviet Union cannot catch up, it will turn into a third world country in 10 years. In order to change, it had to change technologically. In order to change technologically, it changed economically. In order to change economically, it changed politically. I said, okay, if that is so, the first move that Soviet Union should make to improve its image was to leave Afghanistan. That was the time. It was translated into English too. After my arguments, there's one scholar or speaker came to me in the break. I said, young man, you made a good argument, compelling argument, but I will tell you one thing. It's going to be a long war, and there's only one generation of moderates like you, but several generations and fundamentalists and jihadists, they will win this war. So this was the kind of mentality there that the Soviet Union left. And the US left too. But what they left there, communists on one side, jihadists on the other side. And then the jihadists came, and they failed to establish stability. And then Taliban emerged. And then Al-Qaeda came. Now Daesh is there. So these are all byproducts of that kind of war in Afghanistan. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador Jalali. Would you please comment your views on the upcoming election in Afghanistan? It's something that is in the mind of a lot of people. Thank you.
I think election is something that should be done on the basis of the Afghanistan Constitution. If you agree Afghanistan Constitution, it's fine. The election should take place every 5 years for the president elections. And maybe if this election produces a clear winner with a stronger mandate, it will be better for the peaceful negotiation with the Taliban. However, the experience of the past indicates that holding fair and free election in Afghanistan is quite a challenge. Because of the security situation, because of the rigging, because of the weakness of the independent election commission, if that election is disputed again, like in 2014, then the situation will be worse than what we have today. I hope that does not happen. I hope the Afghan political class realize this, that the only way that they will be in a better position to negotiate with the Taliban and others will be to unify and have a kind of legitimate election and free and fair election. That is the major bonus to Afghan government to have it in the negotiation table and also to convince the international community of that. So therefore, I hope that will happen in a free and fair manner.
This issue that we have between the president on one end and the chief executive on the other end, is that going to be resolved in the next?
I hope not. I hope there will be only one clean winner. In 2014, as you know, I was also about to run. But at that time, when the election became very disputable, I said that you have to count the votes 100 times as needed and emerge one winner. Well, it was not done that way, so finally it was a compromise. You know, two people running a country. Coalition it does not have a good history in Afghanistan. You know, a coalition, there are two conditions for a coalition to be successful. A balance between two things. One, to maintain the alliance, not do anything to destroy the alliance. And at the same time, to govern effectively. Sometimes effectiveness is sacrificed for maintaining the alliance. Sometimes alliances undermined in the effort of effectiveness. That balance was not kept in Afghanistan at that time. Because two candidates came, and when they made that alliance, they had their own allies with different demands, different agendas, and that actually created the situation that they were always at the in dispute on certain issues. That kind of a system does not work in Afghanistan, I don't think so. Unless you change the constitution. That's it. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your talk. I read a lot of the fringe Russian press, and
Yeah.
they claim that the United States is still in Afghanistan to try to maintain some sort of influence over China and Russia. And I'm curious as to what the average Afghan thinks of that theory.
I heard this too, but Russia is looking in Afghanistan and interference in Afghanistan, not for Afghanistan or its interest in Afghanistan, but in the context of relationship with the United States. You know, I was talking to some think tankers of Russia, and he said that initially when the United States and alliance went into Afghanistan, we were happy because they will do the dirty job for us, and then Taliban will be removed, and then there was a threat from Taliban to Central Asia. And then when the violence escalated, we were happy. We wanted the U.S. to bleed. And when the United States started after 2011, the schedule was withdrawal and Afghanization, and then we became interested to be part of this because we could not afford to see the U.S. and international community is leaving, and we are also sidelined. So they are always looking at Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the relation of Afghanistan with the neighbors in the recent history always was shaped by their relationship with the third parties. That's also something that's happening. Okay, the U.S. doing what to China? What the China can do to U.S. to China? I don't think now everything you ask in the United States, they don't want this war to continue. They want the U.S. soldiers to come back. It is a problem in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not an easy area, easy country. You can help them to build it themselves, but do not go there and do it for themselves. I think President Trump said that we're doing policing duties. Well, we're not policing, but don't get involved. Help them to do it themselves. I think it was possible. In my time from 2002 to 2005, Afghanistan was peaceful. There was a possibility to continue to sustain this stability, only if you invested in institutions, the rule of law, not in individuals to do things for you. And on the other hand, there was 40 countries. They came with different level of commitment, different level of responsibility, different level of resources, and agendas, different agendas. And I had a problem with different countries. They came and added one flag to the ISAF. Because some countries, in order to evade Iraq and still maintain their relation with NATO, they came to Afghanistan. But There was, I'm not going to name, there were certain countries with PRTs in Afghanistan. They will never move from their compounds out of and the budget were paid by somebody else. So it is the problem of Afghanistan that today they look at Afghanistan or peace in Afghanistan from their own perspectives. Pakistan is looking at perspective from its perspective. India is looking from its own perspective. Iran, you know, the removal of Taliban was the best thing that could happen to Iran. Half of Iran's army was deployed. It was almost, they went to war. But now they are using it in order to advance other agendas with the West. Russia is doing the same thing. And maybe China will do the same thing. Yes, sir.
This is my last question, sir. How about the fact that historically we have a treaty of the Russo-British Treaty of the 1908 about Afghanistan and Iran?
Yes.
And then because of that treaty, for a long time, Afghanistan was peaceful.
Yes.
So why we cannot have the same kind of a treaty that include everyone, and then sign the same from the same spirit to create a new environment in Afghanistan?
With the Russia, you mean? With Iran?
No, I'm talking about the treaty of the Russo-British.
Ah, yes. Yeah, right. Well, that was, that's a great idea. And in 2011, when the Istanbul process started, the Istanbul process was the only process that actually focused on political issues of Afghanistan with the interest. It means that to mobilize the regional countries and outside, including Russia and US, to work together in order to bring peace and stability to Afghanistan. At that time, I think some of us proposed that why don't you establish a kind of organization like Organization of Peace and Cooperation in Europe, in the region, so that everybody will be part of it and resolve this problem in Afghanistan together. But it was torpedoed by two countries. I'm not going to name those countries, but they thought that this will not support their own interest. It is one of the tragedies in Afghanistan is it is so many hands in the jar, and each one wants have to what is in it for me? They says, okay, peace in Afghanistan, fine. What is in it for me? That is the problem. I think yes, you're right. Eventually, all these countries, neighbors of Afghanistan, and the region itself, and the great power, should come together and help. Earlier I said that it is not only peace with the Taliban, or withdrawal of US forces is not going to bring peace to Afghanistan. All these elements who have some role in Afghanistan should actually contribute to that peace. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Who are the Taliban? Is there a single individual that is in control, or is there a committee, or some combination of individuals, or what?
Many years ago, we and Dr. Grau, we wrote an article of the Taliban, who is who in Taliban. Taliban actually, when they came to power, they won by default because they were the same mujahideen that they were fighting the Soviet Union, some of them. Some of the leaders are the same people who were part of some organizations of the mujahideen who were fighting the Soviet Union. And when the mujahideen came, established their government, and they divided the country and lost the trust of the population, crimes, lawlessness. Then some of these Taliban actually came back and organized the Taliban. And then Pakistan also helped them, of course. And they become a group and started to, establish their control from Kandahar, and then from Kandahar they invaded to the north. To 2006, they took over Kabul. 1906, Kabul, and then to Herat. They did not fight very much. People were so, against the Mujahideen government that they actually supported them in many cases. Because three things helped them, three things caused their fall. Three things they said, we are going to disarm the warring factions. People like this is the first thing. Second, they wanted to unify the country. That was also something people like this. And third was to fight lawlessness and bring the rule of law. These were things that people supported them. And then, when they expanded, three things caused their fall. First, because of their, harsh interpretation of Islam, what Afghans are not familiar with that. They did not want that. Second, the discrimination against other ethnic groups, which is a unwritten law in Afghanistan. There's no ethnic fighting in Afghanistan much. Third, they brought foreigners. They brought Arabs, they brought Pakistanis. And these three things actually caused the Taliban. Now, in 2001, when the US went there, initially 1,000 special forces were there and also airstrikes. The rest was done by Afghans themselves because they were so unpopular at that time. Now, after they went overthrown, then the other people joined. Taliban became an umbrella organization. Umbrella organization for madrasa trained the next generation, for foreign fighters, for extremists, other extremists from other countries, for drug traffickers, for criminals. All these come under umbrella. There were people who were just, doing highway robberies, but in order to justify themselves, they said, we are Taliban. So this is the Taliban. Now the Taliban got their legitimacy from certain things. One, violence, because people are afraid to stand, because many people don't like them to come. But they cannot stand up against them on behalf of a government that cannot protect them. And then foreign assistance. This is what they call it. So it is an organization, it's a movement of heterogeneous people. There are some core elements who were established that movement at the beginning, then other groups joined them. That's all.
We have time for one more question, and then our guest will be doing a book sale and signing outside.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Jalali. So because of the major devaluation of Iranian currency versus dollar, as we know, up to 2/3 of its value was lost over the last year and a half, many of the Afghan refugees, for good reason, are returning back to Afghanistan. Some of them have been there for 40 years or so. Do you see this, Ambassador, as a positive or negative for Afghanistan?
Well, eventually, refugees should return to Afghanistan. Iranians were generous to help them. Pakistan also was generous to help them. But there is time for the refugees to come. Usually, refugees return in the wake of victorious armies. And after the removal of Taliban, in 1 year, 3.5 million refugees returned from Pakistan and Iran. And later on, the poverty in Afghanistan, lack of the labor market, unemployment, poverty caused some of them to go back, and insecurity. Now today in Iran, the refugees, although they sometimes complain of mistreatment by Iranians, but the main issue is this: whether Afghanistan provide for the refugees who are returning en masse to Afghanistan. I think they should return eventually, however, under a program that both can Afghanistan accommodate them to extent, not to leave Iran, come to Afghanistan, or Pakistan to Afghanistan and be in poverty. If you go to Kabul now, the people who return and do not have means to sustain themselves are living in a very miserable conditions. Thank you very much for your participation in the rest of the